For thousands of years, every night, the world was plunged into darkness. But about a century and a half ago, one man changed that. He's one of the most famous scientists in history, and for good reason. Because of his work, our streets are lit and our homes glow with light bulbs. Because of him, we can wash our clothes and heat our food with the push of a button. And that's not all. He helped develop radio and wireless control, and even predicted drones, Wi-Fi, and mobile phones. Streets, units of measurement, and the world's most famous electric car all carry his name. But hold on, that's only part of the story. The rest is even stranger. The same man cheated his business partners, was cheated by them even more often, and died penniless. He electrocuted himself, suffered from strange phobias, dabbled in the occult, slept only a couple of hours a night, and probably remained a virgin his entire life. He dreamed up wild projects, planned to give the world free electricity, claimed to have seen spirits, and even communicated with Martians. Some people even believe he wasn't from this planet at all. Really, there's only one person in history who fits that description. His name was Nikola Tesla. In this video, we're going to try to understand why Tesla first became one of the planet's most famous scientists, why the world forgot about him for half a century, and why later he was remembered, almost worshipped, as a god of science. Who was Nikola Tesla really? What did he actually invent? Why did the FBI seize his papers after his death? And why do so many people believe Tesla could have built a kind of paradise on Earth, but never got the chance? When most people hear the word Tesla, what's the first thing that comes to mind? A car. Exactly. When we say Tesla, we picture the car and the man behind it, Elon Musk, one of the richest people on the planet, and the CEO of Tesla, the world's best-known electric car brand. To most people, it all makes perfect sense. Tesla, the scientist, worked with electricity. Tesla, the car, runs on electricity. Elon Musk admires the scientist, so he named the car after him. Logical, right? Except it's not true. Let's bust a few myths right now. Elon Musk did not found Tesla. He joined as an early investor and later became CEO. By the time Elon Musk showed up, the company was already called Tesla. And here's the thing, Musk himself isn't exactly a die-hard fan of Nikola Tesla. In fact, according to interviews, he actually admires Thomas Edison much more. You'll hear a lot about Edison in this video, including the fact that he and Tesla were enemies. And many people believe this. Edison is the main reason Tesla died broke and never finished the experiments that could have completely changed life on our planet. What experiments are we talking about? Well, that's where things get really interesting. Tesla's work touched on mysticism, electricity, extraterrestrial intelligence, energy, vibrations, and other things you wouldn't normally expect from a serious scientist. After his death, many of Tesla's papers and research materials were seized by the FBI. Why? Good question. Since then, Tesla has become the hero of countless conspiracy theories and one of the most iconic scientists in history. His face is on t-shirts, memes, and Telegram stickers. But here's the irony. While almost everyone knows his name, very few actually know what he truly did. Today, you're about to become one of those few. Let's rewind about a century and a half. A young Nikola Tesla was working in the European branch of Thomas Edison's electric company in Paris, helping build light bulbs, power plants, and street lighting. Back then, the electrical industry was as hot and full of promise as the IT world is today. Tesla was just a regular engineer, and corporate success wasn't really in the cards for him. Not because he lacked talent, but because he had too much of it. He didn't want to climb the ladder. He wanted to change the world. So, borrowing money from relatives, Tesla boarded a ship and crossed the Atlantic. It was 1884. He was 28 years old, a young Serbian inventor chasing a dream. and his destination was no coincidence. The United States was home to his idol, Thomas Edison. Today, most people know Edison as the guy who invented the light bulb, which is kind of sad because, first of all, he didn't actually invent it, and second, Edison was a far more complex and extraordinary figure. If we were to compare him to someone modern, imagine Elon Musk multiplied by 10. In the mid-1880s, Thomas Edison wasn't just a symbol of progress. He was progress. He wasn't even 40 yet, and his company had already created the world's first sound recording device, the phonograph, and a light bulb that lasted far longer than any competitor's invention. Edison was on the verge of lighting up the homes of New Yorkers, and soon, the entire world, in a way that feels completely ordinary to us today, with the electric light bulb. The press called him the Wizard, and countless bright young dreamers from around the globe wanted to work in his laboratory. One of them was Nikola Tesla. Tesla believed that Edison was the only man in the world capable of truly understanding him. And his ideas? They were revolutionary. The most important one, alternating current, or AC. In the mid-1880s, AC was still poorly understood. It had the potential to transform life on Earth. And spoiler alert, it eventually did. But at the time, very few people believed in it. One of those skeptics was Thomas Edison. Edison was promoting what's known as direct current, or DC. Now, I know what you're thinking. First, why are we talking so much about Edison in Tesla's story? Second, what happened to the Martians, the virginity, and the mysticism? And third, AC/DC. What does any of this even mean? It might sound crazy, but all of these things, the electricity, the rivalry, even the weird stuff, are connected. So don't worry, we'll get to all of it. But first, let's start with the current itself. Edison and Tesla's ideas about electricity directly contradicted each other. Their disagreement became so fierce that it went down in history as the War of Currents. And this wasn't just a scientific debate. During this conflict, many animals and even people were killed. Tesla and his idol, Edison, would become bitter enemies. And as a result of this war, life on planet Earth would change forever. So, the War of Currents. In the story of Nikola Tesla, this is probably the most crucial chapter, because it's the one that cemented his name in the history of science. The rivalry began in the late 1870s. At that time, Nikola Tesla, the son of a Serbian Orthodox priest, was studying at a prestigious polytechnic institute in Austria, and he was a brilliant student. His main interests were physics, engineering, and surprisingly, languages. He learned nearly a dozen of them and devoured works by authors like Shakespeare, Goethe, and Voltaire. And when Tesla started reading an author, he couldn't stop at one or two books. He had to finish everything. It's an interesting personality trait that today might even be described as OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder. Strange fears, phobias, and obsessions would follow Tesla all his life, and they'd center around just two things: his inventions and his theories. Even as a student, Tesla was fascinated by electricity, a force that had captivated him since childhood. During one physics class, a professor demonstrated a device powered by direct current. But to make it work, the machine needed a commutator, a mechanical switch that reversed current flow. And that small detail, that clunky little device, would spark a revolution in Tesla's mind. That little device, the commutator, converts alternating current into direct current. Without it, the machine simply wouldn't run. But Tesla instinctively disagreed with his professor. He argued that the commutator wasn't necessary, that a motor should be able to run on alternating current alone. Not only that, he claimed it would work better, with less friction, fewer parts, and fewer chances of breaking down. Naturally, the professor decided to prove the student wrong. Right there, in front of the entire class, he showed that without a commutator, the device indeed stopped working. Case closed. Except not for Tesla. The professor had no idea that the young man standing before him had what today might be called OCD, an obsessive drive to prove his point no matter what. And for the next few years, Tesla would dedicate himself entirely to doing just that. Now, this is the moment when we need to talk just a little about physics, and specifically about electric current, because without it, you can't really understand who Nikola Tesla was, why he clashed with Edison, or why most of what we'll talk about today revolves around this one idea. Don't worry, I promise to keep it short and simple. If a guy who barely passed high school physics, yeah, that's me, could get it, you definitely can too. All right, let's begin. Imagine we have a small motor that needs electricity to spin. The power source? A battery. So we have a simple electric circuit. The battery sends electrons through the wires to the motor, and the motor turns. The key detail here is that the electrons flow steadily in one direction. That's direct current, or DC. On a graph, DC looks like a straight, flat line, smooth and constant. Think of it like water flowing through a pipe in one continuous direction. Now, alternating current, or AC, works differently. Let's say we're powering a light bulb instead of a motor. The circuit is still there, but instead of a small battery, we use a wall switch, the kind you flip on at home. When you turn it on, current flows to the bulb, but this time it's not steady. It's alternating, meaning the electrons constantly change direction, moving forward and backward over and over again. On a graph, that looks like a wave, rising and falling again and again. At the top and bottom of each wave, the bulb glows the brightest. In fact, the lights in your home are constantly flickering, about 50 to 60 times per second. But it happens so fast that your eyes can't detect it, so the light seems perfectly steady. Now, what does all this have to do with Tesla's story? To answer that, we have to go back again, to the late 1870s, when young Nikola Tesla was still a student at the Polytechnic Institute in Austria, and his idol, Thomas Edison, was already busy changing the world. By then, Edison had invented the phonograph, the first device in history capable of recording sound. And while Edison was shaping the present, Tesla was already dreaming about the future, one that would run not on direct current, but on alternating current, the power that would one day light up the entire planet. For the first time in history, a human being could record and replay their own voice. It was an incredible moment, but even that achievement was only the beginning for Thomas Edison. His next big project would be far more ambitious: electric light. People already knew how to light streets and buildings in various ways. Inside homes, most used gas lamps, but they were inconvenient, dangerous, and smelled terrible. The idea of the incandescent light bulb already existed. Many inventors were trying to make one that could burn long enough and be safe to use. The first person who truly succeeded was Edison. In his lab, they created a bulb with a carbon filament, and it could glow for up to 1,000 hours. But that wasn't the most important part. You can build 1, 10, or even 1,000 great light bulbs. But the real question is, how do you power them? You need an entire system: generators, wires, insulation, and everything in between. In the early 1880s, Edison's company began electrifying a small section of Manhattan in New York. His plans were nothing short of grand. Millions of bulbs, hundreds of thousands of illuminated homes. But there was a problem. Actually, several. And the biggest one was this: Edison was committed to direct current, DC. That's the kind of electricity that flows steadily in one direction. But the issue with DC is that to power those bulbs, you have to send a massive amount of current through the wires, which means the wires themselves have to be extremely thick, and that's expensive. Worse yet, as DC travels through the wires, it starts to lose strength. Because of that, Edison had to install generators almost every few blocks just to keep enough power in the lines. Naturally, residents weren't thrilled. The generators were big, loud, and ugly, and the whole system only made sense for large, densely populated cities. In short, electric lighting looked amazing, but if you weren't a wealthy city dweller, you were literally left in the dark. Meanwhile, across the ocean, a young engineer named Nikola Tesla already knew how to fix the problem. After that humiliating moment back in university, when his professor dismissed the idea of a motor without a commutator, Tesla spent years working on a solution: how to harness alternating current, or AC. Because in nature, electricity is already alternating, and AC turned out to be far more efficient for lighting homes and powering cities. It didn't need massive cables, and generators could be placed hundreds of kilometers away from where the power was used. And then, in the early 1880s, after countless hours of calculations and sleepless nights, Tesla had a breakthrough. During a walk in the park, he stopped, grabbed a stick, and drew in the dirt the design of a motor that could run on alternating current. After that, Tesla worked a few more years at Edison's company in Paris before heading to New York. You might think that upon arriving in the States, Tesla would meet Edison, hear his brilliant ideas, and immediately start putting them into practice, all while being properly rewarded for his efforts. But, as you've probably guessed, things turned out very differently. At first, the promising Serbian was hired to work in Edison's lab, fixing direct current generators. As Tesla later recalled, he worked tirelessly from 10 a.m. to 5 a.m. the next day for a modest salary. At the same time, he tried to get Edison's attention and pitch his idea of an alternating current motor. Why Tesla ultimately failed to convince him is still unclear. There's a story that either Edison himself or one of his managers offered Tesla $50,000 to make a direct current generator more efficient. In those days, $50,000 was a fortune, equivalent to over $1 million today, a hefty reward. Tesla completed the task, but when he asked for the promised money, Edison supposedly laughed and said it was a joke, and that the young Serbian simply didn't understand American humor. Whether this story is true is unknown. No written contract for the $50,000 has ever been found. On the other hand, Edison was known for making bold, often impossible promises. What we do know for certain is that 6 months later, Tesla quit. He had no prospects of advancing his alternating current ideas at Edison's company. There were several possible reasons for this. First, Edison was probably genuinely concerned about the dangers of alternating current. Compared to direct current, it is indeed more hazardous to humans. Second, Edison's entire system was already built around direct current. And third, Thomas may not have fully understood what alternating current actually was. The truth is, Edison never had a formal education, not even a full high school. He is a prime example of the American dream, a self-made man who succeeded through hard work, immense curiosity, and a stubborn, often difficult character. Edison is famous for the saying, "I have not failed, I've just found 1,000 ways that won't work." The method of constant trial and error. That was the essence of Edison's work. Understanding the principles of alternating current, however, required a very different kind of mind. A mind like Tesla's. Compared to Edison, Tesla had an excellent education. Technically, he never graduated from the Austrian university. Nikola simply didn't take his final exams because at that time he was struggling with gambling and alcohol problems. But before that, he had been an outstanding student. By Tesla's own admission, Edison could have saved 90% of his time if he had done enough calculations before trying something out. But perhaps the most important difference between Edison and Tesla was this. Edison measured success mainly by sales. Innovation for its own sake didn't interest him. Tesla, on the other hand, never thought of his inventions as products. Despite his lack of business skills, Nikola Tesla left Edison and started his own company. The engineer received his first patents for several of his alternating current designs: generators, transformers, and motors. Tesla quickly met business partners. He worked with them to improve arc lamps and develop other inventions. With his first earnings, he immediately moved into a nice apartment in Manhattan. But the partnership didn't last long. Tesla's partners had no interest in alternating current. Worse, they quickly pushed him out of the company, keeping the rights to his inventions developed during their collaboration. Left without money or a business, Tesla went to dig trenches for Edison's company to lay wires. For such a talented engineer, this was a difficult period. Sometimes he didn't even have enough money for food, and wielding a shovel was hardly the dream job for a scientist with a strong education and knowledge of several languages. Fortunately, Tesla wasn't the only person at the time who understood the potential of alternating current. He met a couple of businessmen willing to fund him in exchange for 50% of the rights to his AC patents. If successful, this could potentially bring in millions of dollars. Tesla's new company soon caught the attention of George Westinghouse. Westinghouse was very wealthy, having made his fortune from designing train brakes at a time when railroads were expanding rapidly. He understood that electricity would be the next big thing, and the winner of this current race would earn an enormous fortune. However, Westinghouse was neither a scientist nor a clairvoyant. He didn't know which system would ultimately win and become widespread. So, he invested in both direct current and alternating current developments simultaneously. It would take several more years before Tesla and his partners could convince Westinghouse that the future belonged to alternating current. Then the businessman offered Tesla hundreds of thousands of dollars for the patent rights, and most importantly, royalties, $2.50 for every horsepower produced using Tesla's inventions. Keep in mind, the amounts I'm mentioning from the late 19th century should be multiplied by roughly 30 to understand their value today. And on top of that, the royalties alone could have made Tesla a multi-millionaire, because electricity would eventually be needed by everyone. With Westinghouse fully backing alternating current, the war of the currents with Edison entered a heated phase. Nikola Tesla temporarily moved to Pittsburgh to work in Westinghouse's lab. Meanwhile, Edison wasn't about to back down. He launched a full-blown publicity campaign. His main goal, to convince everyone that alternating current was deadly. As I mentioned earlier, there was some truth to the danger of alternating current. But first, danger doesn't usually stop people from using things: fire, gas, and so on. Second, Edison's methods for publicly proving his point were, to put it mildly, extreme. To demonstrate the danger of alternating current to the public, Edison electrocuted a number of animals: dogs, pigs, even an elephant. Some of these experiments were filmed using a prototype camera Edison was also developing. Needless to say, the animals died. Another part of the publicity campaign was the electric chair. Edison tried to persuade authorities to adopt this new lethal device, which, coincidentally, ran on alternating current. Allegedly, it was so dangerous it could kill a person instantly. Easier said than done. Engineers working on the device quickly ran into unexpected questions: what voltage should be used, how long should it be applied, and so on. In 1890, the first execution using this method took place. Naturally, things didn't go smoothly. The process took several minutes. The criminal suffered incredible pain, but was still alive. The voltage had to be increased to finish the job. The poor victim's body literally started to spark. Partially, Edison's plan worked. Westinghouse, though trying to distance himself from the controversy, had his business in rough shape at the time. In addition to the tainted reputation of alternating current, there were huge development costs and numerous lawsuits. Some lawsuits came from people claiming they were the first to invent the devices that Tesla had patented. Later, the courts would fully recognize Tesla's rights to the motor and other alternating current inventions. But the battle dragged on for years. Allegedly, Westinghouse asked Tesla to give up those $2.50 per horsepower royalties so that the work on alternating current could continue. Tesla allegedly agreed. If that really happened, it was the biggest financial mistake of his career. He could at least have negotiated a slightly smaller percentage. Thanks to those royalties, the engineer wouldn't just have become insanely rich instead of dying in poverty. More importantly, he could have continued his ambitious inventions, the ones that might have changed the world. But Tesla simply didn't have enough money at the time. On the other hand, no contract between Westinghouse and Tesla has ever been found, so it's unclear if it was ever actually signed. That said, credit where credit is due. Westinghouse believed in Tesla even when the prospects weren't obvious. In 1893, two major events happened in Tesla's life and in the development of alternating current. At the World's Fair in Chicago, inventors and companies showcased their technological achievements. Westinghouse's company won the contract to light the fair pavilion using its alternating current system. A dozen generators designed by Tesla produced more electricity than the entire city of Chicago at that time. The fair was brilliantly lit, astonishing everyone who saw it. 6 months later, Tesla and Westinghouse's company got the green light to build a system of alternating current generators at Niagara Falls. The powerful waterfalls generated energy, which fed the generators to produce electricity. The system produced so much electricity that it could light nearly the entire northeastern United States. For Tesla, it was a double victory. First, alternating current had definitively beaten direct current. Second, building the Niagara Falls generator system was a huge step forward on the path Tesla would follow his whole life, harnessing the forces of nature for the benefit of humanity. To be precise, Tesla had already beaten Edison and direct current a few years before the Chicago World's Fair and the Niagara generators. By that point, most companies had realized the advantages of alternating current, including Edison's own General Electric, which he had to leave, effectively admitting defeat. From then on, alternating current changed life on the planet. Every time we switch on a light or plug in an electrical device, no matter where we are in the world, we're using Nikola Tesla's inventions. Speaking of plugs and devices, here's an interesting fact. Many household devices still run on direct current. You've probably noticed a little box on your laptop charger or other devices. That box's job is to convert alternating current from the wall into direct current. But let's go back to the 19th century. By the 1890s, Tesla had become a celebrity. He became an American citizen. And even though he gave up the royalties in favor of Westinghouse, Tesla was still a very wealthy man. He wasn't even 40 yet, and he was moving in the highest circles of New York society. He lived in a luxury hotel, dined at the finest restaurants, and was always impeccably dressed, which you can tell from the few surviving photos. Tesla was an incredibly fascinating conversationalist. He spoke multiple languages, memorized the works of countless poets and writers, and could discuss almost any topic. So naturally, you might assume his personal life was just as vibrant. But it wasn't. Sure, he was popular with women from high society, both single and married. They wrote him letters and invited him to dinners. Yet Tesla himself, it seems, was completely indifferent. There were a few rumors about his sexuality, but today the consensus is that Tesla was heterosexual, who simply abstained from sexual relationships entirely, and there's no evidence he ever had any experience. One reason might have been his desire to fully dedicate himself to work and science. Tesla himself admitted in his memoirs that women could be a huge distraction from the thinking process. On top of that, he had so many phobias that close relationships were practically impossible. He was a germaphobe, terrified of microbes and touching them with his hands. He also hated touching anyone else's hair or women's jewelry. On top of that, Tesla was obsessed with the number 3. Everything in his life had to be divisible by it. For example, he would walk around a building 3 times before entering and choose hotel rooms divisible by 3, and so on. After hearing facts like this about Tesla, it's hard not to think of Freud, and it naturally makes you want to know more about his childhood. Of course, Tesla's childhood, not Freud's. 1856. During a summer thunderstorm in the small village of Smiljan, Nikola Tesla was born. Back then, his home was part of the Austrian Empire. Today, it's in Croatia. Nikola would become the 4th of 5 children in his family, 3 girls and 2 boys. In a way, Tesla was lucky with his genes. His father was a Serbian Orthodox priest with a solid education, and his uncle was a math professor. His mother, although a homemaker, had a remarkable talent for engineering. According to Tesla's memories, she ran their farm and invented various practical devices, everything from butter churns to weaving tools. When Nikola was 5, his older brother died after falling from a horse. This tragedy likely had a profound effect on the young boy, making him avoid social interactions with both peers and parents. By his teenage years, most of Tesla's strange phobias had already developed. Fear of women's jewelry, fear of touching hair, and even being scared of peaches. The only thing that allowed him to socialize was science, through which he mainly interacted with other people. After school, Nikola was expected to follow in his father's footsteps and become a priest. But fate intervened. Tesla fell seriously ill during a cholera epidemic. He spent almost a year in bed, and according to his own account, he promised his father that he would recover quickly if allowed to enroll in a technical university. His father agreed, and it was the right decision. Tesla would have made a poor priest because, as he himself said, "I love not people, but humanity." Nikola Tesla went on to study at the Austrian Polytechnic and then the University of Prague. He was an excellent student, though he never actually graduated from either. After a few years working as an ordinary engineer, first in a telephone company, then in an electric company, he moved to New York. You already know, more or less, how this young Serbian engineer rose to the top, and in a way, this could be where the story ends. Because I've already covered Tesla's main achievements that cemented his place in the history of science, all connected to that very alternating current. But strangely enough, the most interesting part of Tesla's life begins after that, communicating with Martians, exploring the occult, and delving into mysteries and mysticism. By the mid-1890s, Nikola Tesla was a star of New York high society. Yes, with all his quirks, but that only made him more popular. He loved the social scene for 2 reasons. First, he enjoyed the good life, fine dining, luxury hotels, and elegant parties. Second, these gatherings allowed him to build what today we'd call networking, professional connections. After all, in New York's elite circles, you could meet not only famous writers like Mark Twain, but also the richest people in the country and the world. For example, John Jacob Astor or J.P. Morgan. They could invest in Tesla's new inventions, and the inventor certainly had something to show. In several public lectures, he demonstrated incredible feats, passing electric current through his own body and lighting up lamps without any wires, simply by holding them in his hands. For a person from the late 19th century, even someone who could turn water into wine wouldn't look as impressive. Of course, like any trick, Tesla's demonstrations had a logical explanation. But unlike simple magic tricks, Tesla's performances could actually change the world. There are three interesting aspects of these demonstrations. The first is the so-called coil or Tesla transformer. This device could produce very high voltages. It looks spectacular, which is why you can still see similar devices in various science museums today. The second fascinating element is the wireless glowing lamps. We just talked about how the brightest minds of the time struggled to deliver electricity to ordinary incandescent lamps via wires. Tesla, however, made lamps glow in his hands without any wires. How? Here's the secret. You've all seen fluorescent lamps. They're also called gas discharge lamps. Unlike incandescent bulbs, they contain a gas that glows when electricity passes through it. Tesla was holding an early version of a fluorescent lamp. For the electricity to affect the gas inside, the lamp doesn't need to be connected to wires. There just needs to be a nearby source of electricity, like a Tesla coil. The third interesting aspect of Tesla's performances was the electric current running through his body. Why didn't it kill him? Remember, we recently talked about electric chairs. Tesla performed this trick based on his careful calculations. If the electric charge is high frequency but low in power, it's enough to light up the lamps in his hands without harming the person. That doesn't mean it was comfortable. Tesla himself described the pain and burns he sometimes experienced during these demonstrations. He called these lamps cold light, as opposed to the warm light of incandescent bulbs. You've probably noticed that fluorescent lights have a different color tone. Thanks to this cold light, Tesla caught the attention of millionaire John Jacob Astor. Tesla communicated a simple idea to him. As electricity spreads, people will need lamps, millions of them. His idea was far more profitable and efficient than incandescent bulbs. Astor believed Tesla and gave him a huge sum for that time, $100,000. Tesla needed this money to build a new, larger laboratory. But the laboratory and investments weren't really for working on lamps. Tesla wasn't motivated by profit. He was always concerned about humanity. Tesla's idea was this: light, electricity, sound, and images are all energy. Theoretically, all of this energy should be transmitted through space without wires. This idea fascinated Tesla. In 1899, he left New York's fancy hotels and restaurants and went to a remote place in America called Colorado Springs. Most of you have probably seen a couple of photos of him before watching this video. His iconic portrait and that famous shot from the Colorado Springs laboratory. In that photo, there's a massive Tesla coil, thousands if not millions of volts of electricity, and Tesla calmly reading a book. In reality, that image is essentially a photo montage, two photos combined. First, they photographed Tesla in the lab, then a separate shot of the working transformer without him. Otherwise, he would have been killed by the current. Interestingly, the main goal of the huge laboratory in Colorado Springs was Tesla's plan to transmit electricity around the world without wires, completely free, or nearly free. How could this be possible? You've probably heard of the physicist Heinrich Hertz. At the end of the 19th century, he proved the existence of electromagnetic waves. Heinrich Hertz discovered that you could create an electrical signal in one place and transmit it to another without any wires, as long as both the transmitter and receiver were tuned to the same frequency. Today, both radio and television operate on this principle. So why not do the same with electricity? That's what Tesla thought. Why he, already a famous inventor at the time, went to a small town called Colorado Springs in the middle of the country. He barely told anyone. Aside from experiments with wireless electricity transmission, Tesla also had plans involving Martians. But let's go step by step. A large laboratory was built. The equipment could generate millions of volts of electricity. On the fence, Tesla hung a huge sign that roughly translates to "Do not climb, will kill." During one experiment, the voltage became so high that at one point, the entire town of Colorado Springs went dark. Tesla spent almost a year conducting experiments and even claimed that he was on the path to making electricity spread across the planet freely, without wires and without payment. In reality, he never provided concrete proof. Theoretically, it seems you could light a lamp located a fair distance away if you sent a strong enough electric charge using a Tesla coil. But that ideal picture Tesla imagined: electricity everywhere, free and wireless, appliances that didn't need to be plugged in, and electric cars driving without charging, is simply impossible. For example, think of cellular communication. We've long used phones without wires. Cell signals cross space and obstacles without problems. This is roughly how Tesla envisioned electricity existing. The problem is that the energy required to transmit a cell signal is tiny. That's why cell phones don't kill us, though some people think otherwise. But imagine trying to transmit the huge amount of energy needed to light a lamp or power devices, through walls, and even through our bodies. Impossible. That's why we use wires, buried underground or on tall poles, insulated, and so on. Even if we ignore safety concerns, electricity can't travel long distances without wires, because it quickly loses power. And yet even today, some people believe that the reason we don't have free electricity, as Tesla imagined, is because of the cursed capitalists. For over 100 years, they've been trying to make money off us, and every month, we pay for what should be free. To be fair, some influential American businessmen in the electricity industry in the late 19th and early 20th centuries apparently knew about Tesla's theory and even expressed concern about it, but nothing came of it. Tesla's real enemies were not capitalists. They were the laws of physics and the sheer ambition of his theory. Tesla's failed experiments in Colorado Springs hurt his reputation, not only because he didn't provide evidence for his theories, or because he misled investors and spent their money on other research, but also because he supposedly made contact with Martians. Tesla seriously claimed that his equipment in Colorado Springs received a signal from Mars. Of course, newspapers reported on this. One of the world's leading scientists was supposedly communicating with extraterrestrials. What those signals actually were is still unknown. One thing is clear: they were not from aliens. Maybe they were radio signals that today are received by radio telescopes. Signals from stars or the sun, but not little green men. Perhaps Tesla recorded a radio signal from Earth itself and interpreted it as a message from another planet. At the time, radio was developing rapidly, and interestingly, if Nikola Tesla had had a stronger business sense, he might have gone down in history as the inventor of radio as well. Here's what happened. While Tesla was performing these controversial experiments in Colorado Springs, the Italian inventor Guglielmo Marconi transmitted the first radio message across the English Channel. Some of the technologies Marconi used belonged to Tesla. Tesla had begun experimenting with radio signals immediately after his first final victory with alternating current. During his work, Tesla created the first ever remote-controlled device, a small boat that could be steered remotely. He called it a teleautomation. To make it work, Tesla developed several core technologies that would later become the foundation of radio. If Tesla had focused fully on this technology at the time, he might have been remembered as the inventor of radio. According to one version, his research was interrupted by a fire in Tesla's New York laboratory. Some even claim that the fire was set up by his longtime rival, Thomas Edison. But most likely, the fire itself wasn't the real problem. The main obstacle to Tesla's success was Tesla himself and his ambitions. He saw huge potential in the teleautomaton, a technology that could one day stop all wars on Earth. Allegedly, instead of humans fighting, robots would fight. And eventually, they would become so destructive that politicians would realize the futility of war, much like nuclear weapons. At the same time, Tesla was planning wireless transmission of electricity, and the wireless transmission of sound and messages was just part of his bigger plan. It's now 1900. Tesla is in his mid-40s and in a complicated position. Despite the failures in Colorado Springs, he is still obsessed with his global idea of wireless energy transmission. But finding investors is not easy. After the failed experiments, his sensational claims in the press, and the Mars stories, Tesla is gradually gaining a reputation as a mad scientist. Explaining his global ideas of transmitting everything, from electricity to sound and images, wirelessly, is difficult for investors. They think in terms of tangible products they can sell. And after the success of his alternating current system, Tesla hasn't produced many marketable inventions. Perhaps Tesla understood this, which is why he tried an old trick, asking investors for money for a simple, understandable, but promising invention, while secretly continuing his research in wireless communication. Tesla managed to strike a deal with the famous banker J.P. Morgan. Morgan allocated $150,000 for the development of a wireless communication system, basically a wireless telegraph. He warned Tesla that this was the final sum. No more money would be provided. Tesla knew it wasn't enough for his global vision, but he hoped that once Morgan saw the first results, he would gladly invest more. Tesla bought land near New York and built a large new laboratory called Wardenclyffe, complete with a tall tower. An architect was hired for the design, so the laboratory looked very futuristic. At night, the tower would glow with massive electrical discharges. Tesla once again tried to prove that the main idea of his life worked, but it was all in vain. Meanwhile, Guglielmo Marconi successfully sent a radio signal across the Atlantic. A few years later, Marconi received a U.S. patent for his technology, even though he had used some of Tesla's patented inventions. Tesla, who had previously dismissed Marconi's experiments, called him a microbe. Later, Marconi would win a Nobel Prize for his work in radio. It wasn't until half a century later, long after Tesla's death, that the courts recognized Tesla's rights to many of the technologies Marconi had used. So Tesla can rightfully be considered one of the inventors of radio. After exhausting funds for the Wardenclyffe lab, Tesla went back to J.P. Morgan for a new round of investment. He presented his plan for global wireless communication, but Morgan decided to invest in Marconi's invention instead, which was already showing real results. At this point, Tesla probably began to realize that his idea might not work. Finding new investors proved impossible. This was a moment when the huge royalties from his alternating current inventions could have helped Tesla, but he had given them up. Even if he hadn't, he would likely have invested every last cent into his risky idea. In the later half of his life, many began to see Tesla not as a mad scientist, but simply as a madman. He turned to esotericism again. Tesla had long been interested in certain Eastern religious ideas about the soul. Vibrations, and energy. Some believe this was the reason for his vow of celibacy. He claimed to have once communicated with the spirit of his deceased mother. Tesla even considered the possibility of telepathy and proposed a device to photograph thoughts. Add to that all the Mars stories, and you might start thinking he was just a local eccentric. But for context, Tesla apparently did experience serious mental health challenges, especially later in life. However, many of the strange ideas he expressed at the time were fairly popular among highly educated elites. For example, the idea of life on Mars was taken seriously by many. You can hardly blame people for believing that humanity isn't alone in the universe. After all, this was more than 50 years before we're talking about events from the late 19th century. There were even rumors that Tesla was responsible for the Tunguska meteor event in 1908. The theory goes that there was no meteor at all, and that a massive explosion in the Siberian wilderness was caused by Tesla's experiments with the Wardenclyffe Tower. However, Tesla had already finished his experiments several years earlier, so it's highly unlikely he had anything to do with the Tunguska incident. If we look closely at the famous investors Tesla worked with, there's an interesting detail. John Jacob Astor died in 1912 when the Titanic sank. J.P. Morgan was supposed to be on the Titanic too, but he changed his mind at the last moment. Coincidence? Yes, just a coincidence. Okay, putting conspiracy theories and mysticism aside, Tesla gradually falls into a situation typical for aging scientists. A new scientific theory emerges that contradicts his views, and the older scientist reacts defensively. This happened with Tesla and the rising star Albert Einstein in the 1910s and 1920s. Tesla believed Einstein's ideas were leading science in the wrong direction. By then, Tesla was 60 years old, and his opinions no longer carried much weight in scientific circles. He had long vanished from the radar of current knowledge. Having spent the fortunes earned from his alternating current inventions, Nikola Tesla was living in debt. He was poor and moved from one rundown hotel to another. Housekeepers complained about dirt, feathers, and the large number of bird droppings in his rooms. Tesla's main companions became pigeons. He fed them in the park and even brought sick birds home to care for them. In his diary, he described a female pigeon he loved as much as a man could love a woman, and he claimed he lost his purpose in life after her death. Tesla wrote letters to Mark Twain, except Twain had already been dead for many years. Sometimes, Tesla would be remembered and invited to events. For his 75th birthday, his photograph appeared on the cover of Time magazine, and congratulatory messages were sent by leading scientists of the world. But most of the time, Tesla lived in solitude. This is how he died, alone in his hotel room at the age of 86. After his death, the FBI seized many of Tesla's documents, which sparked numerous rumors. Some speculated that Tesla had been developing a secret weapon, a supergun that worked through radiation. Tesla did have such a project, but it was more science fiction than reality. The real reason the FBI was interested was much more mundane. Tesla's nephew was the ambassador of Yugoslavia to the United States and had sympathies with communists. American authorities feared that some potentially important documents might fall into the hands of an ideological opponent. After his death, Tesla was largely forgotten, only to be rediscovered in recent years thanks to the hype around Elon Musk's companies. At least, that's how it appears to people who aren't familiar with science. The huge buzz around Tesla today is directly connected to the popularity of electric cars, which, by the way, use the alternating current motor, the original version of which was created by Tesla. However, in the scientific community, Nikola Tesla was never forgotten. His discoveries with alternating current, his work in radio, profoundly influenced the history of science and human civilization. The unit of magnetic flux density, the Tesla, is named after him, an honor given to only a select few. Decades later, many of Tesla's ideas finally came to life. Today, we can transmit information, images, and music wirelessly in seconds to anywhere on the planet. In a sense, we are living in a world that once existed only in the imagination of one man, Nikola Tesla.